The first 20 minutes, we thought we'd have to hear from Luke and from Ann what policing and public safety in Milwaukee looks like, and then go a question and answer participation with some major ideas laid out to start with, but its questions would develop from what we've heard, and then finally wrap up and summarize. And we want to create a mutual understanding and respect, build a better dialogue, and have the congregation really be better informed about policing and public safety, particularly here in Milwaukee. We want to dig into some of the tougher questions, not only at the local, but the state and national level. Understand relationships. One specific is, what's the sheriff's office in Milwaukee? How do they interact with each other? As Kathy Anderson's had experience to some extent. A specific area about treatment of people of color, especially Black men, and develop a basis for further dialogue on a more of a intimate level, if you will, or a connected level, between the police and others involved in safety, which is something beyond the police. And this is our aim for the day. Any thoughts, concerns, questions about that? Okay, well, let's go in right away. If Luke and Ann would like to take it over, let's hear what's going on.
Great, thank you, Will. I'll kind of try and clip through this stuff at a decent pace because I want to cover as much ground as I can for you folks.
Oh, by the way, if you'd like a presentation, you can share the screen. You have the power to. Okay.
Thank you. I'm mostly planning on just talking, but I did make some notes of things that I wanted to try and get through.
Okay.
And it's okay if we don't get through all that, but I want to give you a quick idea of what sort of the size and shape of our department. As you folks may know, the city of Milwaukee is about 5 square miles. We have about 36 sworn officers, and about 8 of those are patrol sergeants. So they supervise, or they're supervisors, first line supervisors, and about 4 of those are detectives. We have 2 administrative captains, and then 1 police chief. So our chain of command goes officer, sergeant, captain, chief, and then my boss, as you folks know, is the city manager. The vast majority of our resources are patrol officers, uniformed patrol officers, and sergeants, folks that work the road. And they do a combination of proactive patrol as well as respond to calls for assistance that come in on both the emergency and non-emergency lines. And that's how the patrol division spends their time. They investigate crimes and they try to prevent crimes through patrol, preventive patrol. That does involve traffic enforcement, as well as all the typical things you would expect, like domestic violence or disturbances. Being on the edge of Portland, we get a little bit of all the same crime that Portland would get, but certainly at a much lower rate than Portland gets it. The benefit for that is our officers that work for us, they want to deal with, they get into this profession to help people, and also to try and deter crime and prevent crime. So that gives them some challenge, having some of that crime that spills over from a bigger city. We could be different than some of the agencies a little bit farther out. We have a decent workload, and our detectives have a very impressive workload, and our detective division has had a very strong reputation in Clackamas County for decades. And that's partially based on the fact that we do have some, although it's hopefully spread out as far as possible, some decent crime at times that our folks work. But in law enforcement, there is downtime. During that downtime, traditionally officers would do just patrol, do community engagement activities, be seen, be visible. That's also when they do traffic enforcement, and traffic enforcement is a combination of trying to make the roads more safe, as well as being visible out there so that if there are criminals that are looking for opportunities, they see us out there actively engaged in law enforcement. So that's a form of crime prevention. We wear really noticeable uniforms and drive really noticeable cars, specifically so people will see us. Visibility is a key component to crime prevention. And that visibility will come up in conversations around militarization of police, or around conversations about why do you look so official or formal or a little bit military. That is why we do want to be seen. We want to stand out. And that's an important aspect of crime prevention. We are an accredited agency. We're accredited through the Oregon Accreditation Alliance, and we have been so since 2013. We don't talk about that a lot externally because historically it hasn't necessarily been that much of a focus, but it's an optional process where we invite folks in to essentially audit our organization. And that's a reoccurring process where we get audited every 3 years, and someone comes in and essentially does an audit and inspection process. So we are proud that we are an accredited agency, and we'll probably talk more about that externally from here forward because it is a little bit more relevant now. We've mostly been a built out community since I've been here in 1995. So while the population has gone up, it's gone up very slowly. And our geographic boundaries have changed very little. Some of the things that you folks asked about are related to innovations and policy issues. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our police policy and procedure manual. We contract with a company that's called Lexipol. That's a national company that has a combination of retired career law enforcement as well as attorneys that help draft baseline model draft policies that are based on national best practice, and they're vetted by attorneys and career police professionals. And they then send those out to agencies like us who contract with them. And we receive that as a recommended policy that we then customize to fit our agency and our community. We have that policy responsibility is assigned to our administrative captain, and it probably represents about 20% of his job is dealing with policy related issues. So those are called Lexipol or Lexipol policy and procedures. And recently, within this past year, we have posted those externally on our website. So there's a link where you can access our policies and see exactly what they are. There are no secrets about our policies. And I have to apologize. I've fighting just a little bit of a head cold this past week. I have been to the doctor, boss, and verified it's just a cold. But I'll try not to clear my throat into my little headset mic. So those policies are there. They were never traditionally written in a way that was intended to be particularly clear or easy to read for the public. So they're written very much consistent with traditional police language around these issues. But we recognize that as we start to make those more externally available, we have to look at how well they read to the public. And we're trying to take that into consideration more. So that's sort of a preemptive apology. If you dive in there, there's over 500 pages. They can be a little bit excruciating to read, and sometimes they could be confusing to the public. But we do have to still recognize the main intended audience is our officers. It gives our officers directions and what they can and can't do and how we want them to do it, where they have discretion and where they don't. So they are the primary audience and the public is a secondary audience. But anyone that wants to take a look at those can go to our webpage and look at them. And my boss raised her hand.
I did. And I told him I wasn't going to, and I was going to keep my mouth shut, but I'm not. Because I think it's really important to say that the chief has actually been spending probably, hours with me and with our attorney looking at those policies for the last 6 months. We've been focusing on 15 policies, I think are probably where we landed. And those 15 policies are use of force, discipline, any of the policies where we've heard from the community, whether it's ours or someone else's, that there are concerns or fears about how we interact with those policies. So the reason I'm bringing it up here, I'm sure Luke's going to talk about it in more depth, but we're actually, we're editing them. So if you read them today, they're going to be different probably in about 2-3 months. Just know that that work's already underway and that we're working with our BIPOC community, which is Black, Indigenous people of color here in Milwaukee, to review those as well as with our police union. So just know it's going to be different in about 3 months.
So some policies that if we skip to the policies that are of most importance to this topic in general in society, which is police relations with our BIPOC community, then as Ann mentioned, some of those would be our use of force policies, our complaint policies, and those are some of the ones that we've spent the most time recently looking at. Now, our use of force policy, there's an organization called Project Zero and a movement called 8 Can't Wait. I don't know if any of you would have heard of that, but that movement relates to 8 policy issues that they feel are the most important policies in law enforcement today. So that sort of was the foundation for us to say, let's look at these 8 policies and see what this organization recommends and where we're at in relation to those. Now, I have to say, and I think you folks would understand that not everything that I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything that the community requests, that is in their best interest, but it's certainly always worth taking a long, hard look at and really talking with a lot of different people about those issues. So the 8 Can't Wait policies do include use of force and complaints are significant factors in there. Some of the issues in those policies that are critical is how well we manage our use of force, how well we manage de-escalation training, and how we investigate and analyze our use of force. We do have very progressive policies. Our use of force policies align with 8 Can't Wait as far as how we manage our officers' use of force and how we strive for de-escalation and work to minimize the amount of times that we have to actually use force or violence to solve a problem. We have on the city's webpage, we have a equity page, which does include some information over the course of the last 6 months relating to these discussions in city council meetings. And some of that does include data and statistics. So we also have.
You muted yourself. Luke, you're still mute. By the way, this is how we start every day.
I think Will actually muted me. He was just tired of it. He was done. So we also have a program where we monitor all of our discretionary contacts based on racial demographics. So we track every contact that we make that's discretionary. That could be a traffic stop, or it could be a pedestrian stop of someone walking or someone riding a bike. And we look at the racial breakdown of all of those contacts. And the reason we focus on those is because they're discretionary, which means it was a choice for us. So the type of contact that would be less scrutinized would be if I'm dispatched on a suspicious vehicle and they give say that it's a gray Dodge 2012 Dodge Ram and the license plate is ABC 123, and an officer responds to the area and finds that truck and contacts the occupant, and the occupant is a BIPOC community member. They would scrutinize that less because the officer really had no choice. So we do focus some of that scrutiny on our discretionary contacts, and that's new within the last year or so. The state began a program where they could manage and monitor all of those optional contacts and then analyze them for disparities in outcomes, as well as disparities in the demographic contacts. So we are at the point where we're a tier 2 agency. They break the entire state down into 3 tiers based on population size. And we, the city of Milwaukee, voluntarily complied with that law prior to the point that we were required to by law. They asked who wants to comply with this early, and we raised our hand and said we want to comply. So we began reporting and tracking all of that data almost a year early. And as of July, we had about a year of data that then goes through the organization called the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And one of their charges is to look for disparities in outcomes in law enforcement and in treatment. So they're the body that's designated to scrutinize that data and analyze it and look for problems. We've received a preliminary report from them with some really basic numbers, and then by the end of the calendar year, they hope to have much more in-depth analysis. But that's all data that's new to law enforcement in Oregon and not readily available necessarily throughout the entire country. I'm fortunate to have landed in the Pacific Northwest for law enforcement. In many ways, we are much more progressive, and there are some situations that we just don't experience the way the rest of the country does here. But that's a much longer conversation. So the data analysis of all of our contacts, who are we stopping and why? That is, we have all that information now, and we're in the process of looking through it, and we're using impartial expert third parties, which is the Criminal Justice Commission, to help us analyze that data. The Criminal Justice Commission did say at the beginning that, hey, your numbers look basically good. We don't have any major concerns. We're going to do much more in-depth analysis, and we'll get back to you hopefully by the end of the calendar year with additional information. That's a quick snapshot on that. And certainly at any point someone has questions, they can interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll kind of keep on rambling through. Will, you're muted. I can see you're talking.
But I'm a real tech expert here. Yeah, anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, let's keep on going.
So another thing that's critical is how we investigate our use of force. Obviously, use of force is a huge part of this national conversation. The city of Milwaukee, just so you folks know, we do over 6,000 traffic stops a year on average. That can go up or down by even thousands based on a variety of factors. We generate over 5,000 or around 5,000 separate investigations. And we have over 20,000 contacts with the public each year on average. So, and we make over 700 arrests a year. So for over 20,000 contacts and over 700 arrests in 2019, we generated 54 use of force reports. Now, our agency requires an officer to document a use of force report if they used force on someone that could result in injury, could have resulted in injury, or did result in injury, or if they threatened to use force. So if I pull out a taser and someone's saying they want to fight with me and I point a taser at them and say, hey, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back or I'm going to tase you. And then the person says, okay, I don't want to be tased, and they comply, that would still be documented as a use of force incident. So we document, which is consistent with the request from 8 Can't Wait, which is have comprehensive force reporting, where you report even the threatened use of force or minor use of force versus only reporting when someone's injured. So we're very progressive in that area, and we're pretty much where we need to be in that area. So for over 700 arrests a year and over 20,000 contacts in a calendar year, we generated 54 use of force reports during 2019. So that's just over one a week when we're doing a lot of contacts on a weekly basis. And some of those are dispatched calls. So I do refer back to that, over 700 arrests and 54 use of force. That should be a good indication of the effort that we put toward de-escalation and toward generating voluntary compliance, and also our skill and success with that. If we're making over 700 arrests a year and only 54 of them result in a use of force, we obviously care deeply about keeping people safe and resolving things at the lowest level possible. Now, I'm bragging about that a little bit when I shouldn't. That should be just obviously should be who we are. And it is. It's nice in an agency this size with 36 or 40 people. It does tend to be fairly family oriented. We all know each other. And if someone else does something that's inappropriate or stupid, for lack of a better word, it affects all of us. So it is like a family, and if I do something wrong, it's going to affect everyone in the family. And I think folks can all appreciate that. In a bigger agency, it certainly is much more difficult to stay on top of all that and track all that, and to manage it as well as it is with a smaller agency.
Luke, can I just add something real fast?
Yeah.
One of the things I appreciate about our PD is that the complaints that I look at come from inside often. So for me, it says the most actually that not only don't they want to look bad, but they hold each other accountable to assure that they don't look bad. So it says something about our officers. It's not out of a lack of caring or kindness. They stand for each other and they stand for the department, but they also make sure that people learn from their mistakes, because their mistakes are known. Keep going.
I appreciate that. So another thing that I want to emphasize on the use of force is how we investigate it. Officers are required to notify a supervisor as soon as there is a use of force. The supervisor is required to respond to the scene, and the supervisor is required to immediately begin conducting an independent investigation. Now, minimum staffing for us is 3 people, 2 patrol officers and a sergeant. We often could have twice that many people working, but we should never have less than 3 people working. So a sergeant is required to respond and then immediately begin talking to people, gathering information about what happened, as well as looking for and talking to and identifying any witnesses that saw or heard anything. So the supervisor is immediately conducting an independent investigation separate from the officer's investigation of whatever just happened. And at the end of that, all of the officers involved submit reports that are part of a criminal investigation about what happened and why. And the sergeant also then submits an administrative report about what he learned from his separate independent investigation. All of those reports are then forwarded to captains and the chief for review. We modeled that policy essentially after the Portland Police Bureau's policy, and the Portland Police Bureau's policy was formed largely through the interactions of the Department of Justice in their agency. When they recognized they didn't like the types of use of force data and outcomes they were seeing with Portland, the Department of Justice became involved in their agency, and then they have a lot of say in dictating how they will do business. So that helped shape their policy, and their supervisor's investigative role in those incidents was one of the things that we looked at and said, hey, that's actually a pretty good model, and you could catch things that you would otherwise miss. It requires a little bit more work on the front end by our supervisors, but it's well worth the effort because we get a lot more information and we have a lot more opportunity to catch issues or to train people or to recognize if we're on the right track or not on the right track. So we feel really good. I don't know that very many agencies in Clackamas County go to the extent that we do to investigate our use of force. And I feel really good about what we're doing for our community around the use of force and about the stats in general. We will always try to keep those as low as possible, but there are a lot of moving parts on this business, and you can only keep those numbers so low. Despite our best efforts, there are things that will not end peacefully, and we accept and welcome the challenge of trying to get as many of those to end peacefully as possible and to leverage the best outcomes possible in situations that are really complicated. And I want people who want that challenge. I don't want people who want violence. I want people who want to be given a near impossible situation and they tell me, hey, I can fix that. And consistently get really good results like, wow, I can't believe we managed to get through that well. So that's who we try to be as an agency. Complaints we have in the past year and prior to Minneapolis, we had made progressive changes in how we track and monitor complaints that we felt good about. And at the time, those were not made because they were demanded by the community. They weren't made because they were demanded by new legislation. They were just made by us internally because we recognized there was a weakness in our process and that there was room for improvement. So about over a year ago, we began tracking all the complaints that we received, even if they seemed really frivolous or if they seemed like we had resolved them on the front end with a conversation. So we get complaints that can range from, I got stopped and I think it was illegal. And that can at times be resolved with a conversation where we explain the law to someone and they can be then satisfied that, okay, I guess I was mistaken about the law. And the complaints can range up to they feel there was a policy violation. We get very few complaints related to use of force. I don't even remember the last time we got a complaint specific to the use of force. And a lot of our complaints, if I'm honest, revolve around someone was sarcastic with me, they came across condescending, or I felt they were rude. So they're customer service oriented complaints. Not that those are not serious. That's still an incredibly important part of our business and our culture. But they don't tend to be around excessive use of force. Thank goodness, and knock on wood. But we do track all of those now, more so than we did 18 months ago. 18 months ago, if you called and you talked to a first line supervisor and they felt at the end of that conversation that it was resolved, there wouldn't necessarily be any tracking of that. And obviously the weakness in that is management doesn't have a chance to track that as well. So there's a lot more that we just don't know if those are ending with a phone call and there's no documentation and tracking on them, regardless of if they weren't super serious complaints.
Okay, thank you. That's a nice overview. I'd like to ask one particular question before we get into general questions from Ann. How do you see the police force fitting into the city's public safety process?
Great question. I think that in a small town like ours, we often have looked at public safety as being the police department, very specifically. And that has shifted over the last several years. I do just want to call something out that I hope you all are hearing, which was about a little over a year ago, this thing happened. So we started tracking. A little over a year ago, we started working on our data. A little over a year ago. I'm just going to remind you that a little over a year ago, I got a new chief named Luke Strait. And he gets a lot of the credit for the leadership that he's put into place here. I loved our old chief, so don't get me wrong, he's a wonderful human. But Chief Strait really has stepped up to the plate before asked to try and find a way to be as transparent as possible with the community and to be a leader with his staff and to lead by example, but also with kindness. And I just respect that a great deal. So going back to your question. One of the things that's unique in our form of government is that I am a civilian and I'm not an elected official. So I am appointed by the elected officials because I have a certain degree and I have certain experience and I have management and they bring in a professional in order to lead the city from the management side, and then they lead them from the policy side. We have an incredible group of people who are passionate and kind and smart leading the city right now for policy and on that side of things. But in Portland, you don't necessarily have a civilian who's over the police department. You have an elected official. So in this case, I am the boss of Luke, sorry. And it's different. It's different to have a professionalized civilian oversight than to have a political oversight process. And it's unique to smaller towns. Usually they're for towns about 100,000 or fewer that would have this form of government. So it's not really fully answering your question, but I did just want to call out the difference between what we see in the news around Portland and then and the work that we're doing here in Milwaukee, and why the people don't always fit the same titles and the same spaces. So the way I see public safety fitting in is, for a long time, emergency management was actually also in the police department. Last year, that was actually just a few months ago, that was moved to my office because we had someone who's really exceptional. She works regularly, consistently with Luke, but it's more of a philosophy than it is just public safety. We also passed a safe fee about 4 years ago. And public safety for us was also, how can people walk in our town? How can they get from point A to point B and be safe in our town? And we started building sidewalks. We're actually reconstructing roads, bikeways, and sidewalks all across the city right now to try and help people stay safe, so that Luke doesn't have the back end problems, which is someone's been hurt or killed in an accident. So we're trying to be proactive from that way. We're spending about $81 million actually over a 9-year period on sidewalks and on bike lanes. On intersections, we actually have $4.2 million that came from ODOT to improve the Oak Street crossing on 224. Yeah. So we see this as this whole team approach to trying to keep people safe. And our officers are at the table as we're figuring out safe crossings of our major roadways, where we need diverters, how we're going to encourage people to use diverters, how we keep everyone safe in different ways.
Okay, at this point, little time check, we're actually at 2:30. We've had a good presentation, but we haven't had much time for dialogue or further questions or comments.
I think we can both stay for a while if you all want questions. Okay. We'll do whatever you need.
Would another half hour be okay with you guys, or is that too much?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm totally flexible.
Sounds good. So, sort of transitioning here. First of all, a little wiggle room here. I'll take my hand, I'll unmute. There, I don't have to keep holding down the space bar. I'm serious. Just a little, just stretch. Get out there and get some more movement in your eyes, because you sit for a while and you just kind of not really all there. Okay, so we've had a really good by the way, I have started recording this partway through the introductions. What I plan to do for a formal recording is to start from the point where I showed the agenda and then go into the presentations, if that's all right. If anybody wants to see themselves being introduced, feel free, but I want us to get to the meat of the thing, which is where are we going and how are we getting there? Okay, so at this point, we've had good presentations. I love the idea of having the city manager and the police chief there because of what you're talking about. The public safety is greater than the police bureau, so police department, excuse me. The general areas, first of all, let me ask, who would like to ask a question or have a comment? Kathy, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yeah, Kathy Anderson. I'm curious to know whether the Milwaukee Police Department includes any people of color, and at the same time, what about city employees in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, we have, for people of color, we have 2 Hispanic employees, Melissa Campos and Eduardo Sanchez. Melissa was a cadet with us for 4 years. We had she was a cadet along with her sister and her brother. Her brother worked for us for a year or 2, and then he went on to work for the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, and her sister works for Canby PD. And the reason I explain all of that is to say that for BIPOC community members who want to get into law enforcement, they have a lot of options, because contrary to popular belief, I know our agency is stronger with diversity. That makes us, it just makes us a stronger organization, and we all know that. Those employees can pick and choose where they want to work very easily, and it's a very competitive market out there. That can make it difficult for us to grab our BIPOC community members that want to get into law enforcement, because I do then compete with big businesses sometimes with perks that we just simply can't offer. We're very competitive within our market. So I feel great about our overall compensation package, but we'll try to use a better culture to attract and then keep people. But it is very competitive for minority community members that want to be in law enforcement. And we do lose some of those to bigger agencies that offer some things that I can't offer. And that is okay. So we have lost a few over the years. We currently have 2 Hispanic police officers who work in the patrol division.
And Melissa, does Melissa speak Spanish? I know that Eduardo does.
Yes, they both speak Spanish, and we have actually several other Spanish speakers as well.
Kathy, your question also was about citywide. So yes, we do have a diverse staff. Right now in Milwaukee, we have a 12% BIPOC community in general at large. No, that's at large. For the city staff, I believe it's 9 to 10%. So we're not there yet. We're working on it. But we have, I believe, 13 staff people who consider themselves people of color. Some of the work that the city is doing right now around that, though, Luke mentioned that we have a website, which is www.milwaukeeoregon.gov, and then /equity. We have a landing page right now that we started 6 months ago that has a bunch of updates around these topics if you are interested. We've also just hired an equity program manager. It's actually a gentleman I've worked with for years. He and I started in Salt Lake County, I think 15 years ago, and he applied for this job and the community selected him. We had a community panel for the selection process, and he was chosen. So he will be here starting next week. John is wonderful, but his work really will be looking at the citywide. How do we become a more equitable workplace? How do we make sure that we're doing our best and doing our best for all of our community members? And that means especially right now, our BIPOC community members. I also bring up that website because the pastor asked a question about mental health and spoke about mental health at the start of this. We actually had a really incredible presentation by a couple of our officers who talked about mental health and how we interact around mental health on our at a council meeting. I think it was almost 2 hours long, so be prepared. I would also tell you that in that conversation, there is a trigger warning, and it's cute because it's a cat and it helps, like you think it's gonna be cute, but it's a real trigger warning. So if you are not able to stomach some of the difficult topics that we talk about in police and law enforcement, I would plan on only watching the first part until you get to that trigger warning, and then I would stop watching it. Because it's very, very transparent with the public about the things we see and how we engage in those spaces.
And the only other thing I would mention I'm sorry, go ahead, Reverend.
Thank you. Where is that available?
It should be on, I think we put it up on our website, but I will actually send you the link to that meeting in particular if it's not. But on the website right now we held listening sessions. So all the notes from the listening sessions, so what our BIPOC community members told us were struggles for them right now in Milwaukee, that's all public. And we actually double checked the notes with the participants before they were posted, just to make sure we captured it correctly. We've done a number of articles in our pilot newsletter. Those are posted there. We have several presentations to council that we've done, staff reports that we've done to council. Those are all available. Most of those conversations have been me and Luke together. So my work isn't only PD. I actually have a lot of other work around equity, but because of the national call for a reconciliation around policing in America, he's been working with me the most. But just simultaneously, because I have people who care on this call, we're also working a ton on housing affordability. So we're working on our residential zoning code to make sure we can get more housing into Milwaukee. We also are doing several programs to cut the price for affordable housing in Milwaukee to make sure that people can actually build it, and we can help people stay in Milwaukee. So the interesting thing with equity work is all of it is equity work. Everything we do. And so some of the stuff will show up on that website, some of it won't. But if you ever have a question about any of it, you're welcome to give me a call.
Thank you so much.
Well, one other point was that Mr. Mekademus was chosen to be on the city council. It was our first African-American city council member since we've lived here.
It is the first ever. And Desi is incredible. We're really excited to have him on this team. Actually, he and Luke have been working throughout the summer on so Desi was the head of the BLM event that happened in Milwaukee Bay Park. Luke has participated and tried to be supportive of those events and work with Desi at every turn to make sure that we're lending our I hate repeating the word, our support to our BIPOC community, and we're showing this as a growth forward model as much as we can. But it is really exciting to have Desi on the council.
And the only other thing I wanted to mention around our internal diversity is one of the things that's critical for us as a city or as a police department to be particularly successful there is some community support and cohesion. We certainly have seen an escalation in tension nationally and locally within the community, and that can make it difficult if a BIPOC community member considered being in law enforcement. If they don't have support from family, friends, and community, then they won't do it. So employers aren't the only barrier to that. Community support and tension is a tremendous factor. And I hear about that from individual one-on-one people where they say, you know, I actually would be interested, but without the support of family, friends, and community, I couldn't do it. So I think something collectively we can all do is have open conversations where we de-escalate those issues as much as possible and create that sense of community where it is safe and supportive for BIPOC community members to say, actually, yeah, I would like to take that challenge and be a part of the solution because they do need the support of family, friends, and community to be in those positions.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If nobody else, I have a few, just in terms of one of them, a question came up when I was thinking, you said, there's a progressive something. We call ourselves a progressive church. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, okay, Luke and Ann, what would you say? When you say progressive, what do you have in mind?
Well, when I look at where we fall on a lot of these policy issues, and I'm constantly checking where agencies around us fall and where agencies across the country fall. I have a listserv where I can shoot out a question to about 50 police managers across the country and hear where they're all at. And I constantly reach out to other agencies that we kind of identify with where I feel like they're on the right track to see how they're managing these issues. I consider Milwaukee a fairly progressive city, and I believe our agency, the police department, is generally taking fairly progressive stances on these policy issues, as opposed to the most conservative stance possible. Police transparency and accountability, those aren't just buzzwords. They are critical to having an agency that really serves our community well and then enjoys the support that they earn through that service. So constantly analyzing how we handle calls, how we handle use of force, the demographics related to our stops, and emphasizing professionalism, empathy, holding people accountable. That's not always popular or fun. As you folks know, you all have kids, and it's not entirely different. Accountability is critical. We will never have the organization we want to have without accountability. And we generally take progressive stances on those issues. And like Ann mentioned, she's aware of the fact that in a decent percentage of those are issues we're bringing up on our own. And I guess that's why I would describe us as a fairly progressive agency and a fairly progressive city. And I did notice that a lot of the values in your mission statement align very closely with that of the city as well as our department. And I appreciate that.
And I would define it only slightly differently, which is we're a learning agency. So we're looking at, just because something's good doesn't mean it can't be better. And if someone feels excluded from that process or from those policies or from that work, then we're not done. We have to keep going. Things become stagnant. They become no longer relevant. And it's really important, especially with policing, to stay relevant, to stay what our community needs us to be, not just what we thought we were. You know, when I became a city manager, I would have told you that the job was A, B, C, and D. Not this year. It's a very different job. But you change, times change, and you create what your community needs to feel supported and safe. And I'm excited to be a part of a team that does that.
Our city, which Ann can speak to better than me, recently passed a council goal. Council goals are a significant part of what drives the actions of the city over the course of the year or the budget cycle, and also what we put money and resources toward. And they recently made equity, inclusion, and justice a council goal. And there would be references to that on the city's page, which then gives us support to put time and resources toward those efforts.
I'm hearing some elements about sort of the three things that I heard. One was being flexible. So you stay up with the time. Don't just do it because that's the way you've done it all the time. A second was developing a partnership relationship with the community rather than a top-down administrative, we're the boss relationship. Because of course, in policing is extremely important and difficult to do in a situation. How to maintain control without getting what they call badge heavy, if you will. And the third was a willingness to bring the community in to the job on a meaningful way. Being accountable, being responsible, listening to people in ways that people feel heard. Is that a fair summary of some of the parts?
I would go even farther and say that folks want to not only be heard, but they want to see that they have the ability to have influence. So it's one thing for me to be transparent and share information with you, and it's another for me to listen to what you, the community, has to say. But the third, and obviously maybe most important, is that there is the opportunity for some influence there, where based on what we hear and based on objective analysis, we might actually change how we do business and evolve and progress. And I do think the city's doing a really good job with that in general right now.
Well, speaking of what the community can get involved and so on, one of the parts that we put on and what we would like to have happen was getting our church involved possibly in needs in a neighborhood or needs in the city's doing in general, where we could be an active participant in this. What sort of things come to mind? Pastor Jean.
I can ask a broader question, and that is
Sure.
I've been hearing a lot of things, of course, this terrible year with all of the riots and protests downtown and response from the feds that seemed disproportionate to those of us. I mean, I to be honest, did not go downtown at night. I went to a bunch of protests, but not at night. So I don't have a firsthand experience of that. But one of the things that I've been reading, one of the critiques of policing as it has evolved in the century, is that there's an increased militarization of the training police officers received, of the equipment that you wear for visibility. And I get that visibility makes you, in itself, de-escalates or is a way to prevent crime. On the other hand, some of the images of police officers that I saw were terrifying. It looked like a war zone, not a neighborhood with a police officer present. So I'm just wondering, who decides the level of militarization of the training and of the equipment that's received? I know that there's some stuff that was decommissioned and given to police forces, and it looks like a tank that someone would use in a war zone, not neighborhood policing. So if you could help me understand how that evolved and who gets to make those choices about training and equipment.
So who makes those choices ultimately is myself and my boss. And And that's consistent with how it is in most agencies, but I can speak most to how it is in our agency. So the militarization of police would typically be associated with equipment that you referred to, like a tank. Now, first of all, the city of Milwaukee doesn't own any equipment like that. But I do want to speak a little bit to that issue. Most of the equipment that you see and that would get visually associated with the militarization of police, most of it is defensive equipment. Those tanks that you see, those are armored personnel carriers, where you can put 6 police officers in one of those and drive it in front of a house where there's a armed and barricaded gunman who's committed a really violent crime. And in those scenarios, usually someone has already demonstrated a propensity towards substantial violence. They're armed and they are in a situation where they know, hey, my life as I know it is over. I'm looking at my best case scenario now is life in prison if I get arrested. And they're making some decisions about how they're going to handle the next couple hours of their life at the worst point in their life. So our ability to protect people is important. So in all those things don't happen monthly. They're rare for those things to happen, say in our specific city. County-wide, they do happen. So that is part of our responsibility, is to give our people the equipment and the training they need to be safe out there. Now, you may be aware that we have in the last year, we've had, 18 months ago, we had a police officer that was shot not that far from your church. And fortunately, he survived and he's back to work and he's a great employee. We've had officers that have been attacked with knives and physically assaulted. So it can be violent at times. And I have a responsibility to give them the equipment they need to be safe and the training they need to be safe. But then to ensure that the people that I'm recruiting and hiring have more of a guardian mindset than a warrior or military mindset. I don't want people with a military mindset. That is still a low percentage activity for us. Very low percentage of their time is spent dealing with things that are that dangerous.
Right.
Can I add a couple of things?
Yeah.
So I'm a civilian. I started this conversation saying that. So this was the first time I was responsible for a police department. 4 years ago, I started being responsible for 21-year-olds who have guns. Just want that to sink in a little bit. Yeah, that took me a few days to get used to, just that feeling like, oh, that's a part of my job now. A few things that I've learned since I've been here as a civilian. One is that in my department, their number one goal is to not hurt someone. Every time. Their number one goal is to not hurt someone. I can't speak for other police departments. I'm not going to try. But this police department works very, very hard to not hurt someone. And one of the best descriptions I've ever heard was from an officer who said, if I have to hurt someone, I'm probably also hurting myself. There's not an interest from my team to do that. The second piece of this is that means that we have to have tools in order to not hurt people. And so I learned about how you use a beanbag gun instead of a full weapon when you may be in a situation where you're trying to stop someone from hurting you before you have to pull a trigger on a full weapon. And I'm not even using the words right. That's how civilian I am. I should be real clear. So I get really cautious about taking tools away that discourage my team from using a gun and encourage them to use an alternative that keeps them safe without hurting somebody, or at least killing them. The demilitarization piece, I will also say that when we were first having this discussion back in June, I asked if we had any of these things, and the chief honestly laughed at me. So it's hard for us to speak to you from the perspective that we don't have a tank. I think at the time we had like 2 of those shields. Like, we really don't have that kind of material in our police department. Where this has come up more is the look of an officer and what they wear for us than other departments, because we just don't have those other tools that we're talking about. And I'm actually going to transition from the police department to my judge for a minute, just to talk about her response when I talked to her about this, or something similar a couple of years ago. She is very liberal politically. She cares a lot about people. She has 2 little girls. She looks a lot like me. We're not the same person, I promise, but we both have curly brown hair and we're about the same height. And she works for the council, so she doesn't work for me. She's actually my coworker. And we were talking about trying to support families in crisis who have students who are not attending school, and they have reached the point where they may get kicked out. And the school district's trying to do anything they can to keep the student in school. And we don't even really do this that much right now. We've tried to, we're in a process with the school district of only using this bare minimum a couple times a year tops. But one of the discussions was, could the judge come and wear jeans and a sweater instead of her drape, her black drape? And her answer was, if you have gotten to me, then you want someone who looks like they're in authority. If I come with a sweater and jeans on, then I'm just another person who's shown up, and then you're wasting your time and money. And I'm not sure I'm the right person to be in that space with you. I think that there's a lot of openness around what our officers wear, what their uniforms look like in terms of colors and how we wear them. But it is another de-escalation tool, as was said earlier, about, I don't know if I want people to push the limits with somebody, because at the end of the day in this country, as long as other people have guns, our officers will also have guns. And that's serious, whether or not they're in a black uniform or a blue uniform or a gray uniform or anything else. So I struggle with that. I don't know the answer, but I'd love your insight.
Yeah, that leads to another question that I have about, well, I just lost the question. I had a question that just left my mind. Oh, yes, about one of my deep concerns is of guns on the street, which make all of us less safe, and particularly make police officers less safe. And I'm wondering if there is, I mean, it's a highly political question, but I'm wondering if police agencies in general come down on the side of not restricting but putting in sensible gun restrictions so that civilians aren't armed with military grade weapons to aim at police officers.
You know, we're generally going to obviously defer back to the Constitution and look at.
Oh, I lost your sound.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't know. I couldn't hear her.
So we're going to defer to the Constitution and protect people's constitutional rights. And we certainly understand there are a lot of big discussions and debates there when it comes to guns. We generally always advocate for reasonable control measures, for sure. Background checks, for sure. The better, the quicker and the more thorough, the better. But we do defer back to the constitutional rights of people, because that is literally what we're sworn to uphold, is individuals' constitutional rights. So we will leave that to voters and legislation. But yes, we do advocate for good, responsible control measures and background checks, for sure.
Okay, well, a little pause here. We've come up to the witching hour, if you will, just about 3 minutes left in that half hour I talked about. This leaves 3 minutes to say next steps. What I was saying, we as a church, I've been impressed with what we've heard. There's a lot more to be heard, and there's a lot more thoughts to be dealt with here. But we continue a relationship with Milwaukee City and the police department and so on. What sort of things would you want a church like us to be doing?
I have a list if he doesn't. Can I go first? We are regularly asking our community members, and that does not mean you live here. I want to be really clear. At the beginning, people were clear about where they lived. If you come here once a week, then your experience in Milwaukee matters to us, whether or not you pay property tax. So I'm asking this of your congregation in general. We would love to have you engaged in the work that we're doing around our comprehensive plan. Our zoning code, our tree code, and our parking code right now are up online. There's an online portal called Engage Milwaukee. It's in both fully in Spanish and fully in English, so you can engage in either of those spaces. And we would love to get your feedback. We do those types of things regularly. There will be an equity page that will also be an Engage Milwaukee page where we'll be talking about some of this. The issue for me right now with equity is that I believe that the thing I've learned the most over the last 8 months is that I am white. And I do not know the experience of people of color. And it's actually really important to me that I hear from people of color about their experience. And so there's a lot of allies who want to engage in the space, and I love them. They're welcome to join in, and there's going to be spaces like that, such as this Engage Milwaukee piece. But right now, in this critical moment, it's actually really important to me that I'm talking to our BIPOC community members very specifically about policing, about our policies, about our union contract, because they are the people who have been disproportionately affected across this country when it comes to those things. So, but there's still room, I guess is what I'm saying. As a person who cares about these issues, there will be space to engage around equity issues. But housing, I'm sure you all have done homework around it, but redlining happened in Milwaukee. For those of you who don't know what redlining is, there are absolutely tenants within deeds in this city for some of our housing stock that says that if you're a person of color, you could not own that house. Those do not apply any longer, but how degrading and awful for those to still be sitting on the books. So there are, we are currently in this process to try and right some of those wrongs. We need your feedback on how to do that. So I've given you sort of that first tranche of work, which is zoning and then equity. There will be an opportunity for people to weigh in on other measures over the course of the year. Those are just the ones that I know right now are happening. Another way that churches are engaging with us is food pantries are really important right now. Getting food to our families is critical right now. Helping families in need we're all in this together. So anything you're doing to get support to families, especially at this time of year, would be really appreciated. There are showers, movable showers that are in different parking lots at different churches right now for the houseless population, so that people can actually get a shower and take care of their needs as well. So that's something you can work with the county on. Is if you're interested in that, there's a temporary use permit that you can get in order to have that in your parking lot. What I feel like we're looking at our temporary housing ordinance right now. So that's someplace where you may want to engage. That actually would allow for people to have vehicles parked in their parking lot when people are houseless. And that is, I believe, went to Planning Commission last week. So that will continue forward to the City Council. That's a great place for you all to engage. Those are places where faith groups have been really supportive of us doing what's right. And we really appreciate you standing for the needs of all, not just for the needs of those with money. So those are all places where it would be really helpful. And the council is always looking for people who can bolster that support.
Thank you for those.
Anne mentioned like that shower program that some churches have partnered with. I believe that's coordinated through the Clackamas Service Center, and I pasted a link for them into the chat for this. And
It's
they
one
do
of our
have
major charities, yeah.
We have a long relationship with them.
Awesome. And they have a variety of ways that you can get involved in those different community issues that you folks may even know more about than I do, but they are a great program.
The same ordinance we're talking about, by the way, on the temporary housing would allow for 90-day heating and cooling sheltering. if you want to do longer, you actually, sorry, the building code starts jumping in with fire suppression systems. A lot of churches, those are expensive. So a lot of churches are struggling there, but absolutely, if you think that you have a system where you could house people during the week, but definitely for the 90-day, because the standards are just easier to jump through. And we are looking for heating and cooling locations here in the city of Milwaukee. As climate change occurs, it is getting hotter in the summer and colder in the winter. It's the extremes that occur. So having safe places for people is really important.
Well, at this point, we've got to talk some more, but I think we've talked enough. We've learned a lot. I'm very glad it's a recording so I can go back and we can share it with the other members of the congregation, and you guys will get copies. And at this point, I want to continue the relationship, and I think the council will. We can talk further if it's all right. We can call you guys up and say, okay, here's what we're thinking about. And one of the reasons I got involved was there's a thing down called Movement Forward out of Atlanta, Georgia. And they have a program called One Cop, where a precinct officer is linked up with a congregation on a regular check-in basis. I don't know if you want to do that with us or whatever. We want to do that with you, but it's one possibility. For example, there's an ongoing, how are things going in either direction?
I love the idea. Absolutely, 100%. I will say that I'm trying to make sure that our new engagement opportunities, again, are highlighting people of color.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we've struggled with is that we are really good at hearing white voices. We are really struggling with how we connect with people of color. So just know that that'll be one of those spaces when John gets here that I'm probably going to prioritize first, if it's every month, is I just want to make sure that we're doing that the most.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you completely. I understand in various ways. I understand the issue, and we'll go for that.
However, I love this. This is a wonderful conversation, and it also helps Luke and I practice. So
sure.
We're practicing how to talk about this work and how to lead this work and how to guide this work. And so you also gave us a huge gift today, and I'd love to do it again, but you are welcome to call me at any point. I know that Luke, whenever people call him, spends a disproportionate amount of time one-on-one with our community members. I really value that in him. So feel free to reach out to us at any point, and we are happy to help.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for both of you to coming and being responsive. We've had a lot to involve with. I'm very pleased. Anyone have any further thoughts besides thank you and good night? Kathy, unmute. Unmute. Gotta.
For some reason, my spacebar wasn't working. I just wanted to say that in your work with people of color, what we as a congregation, and especially some small groups, really want to know how we can be allies. One of our small groups is just starting a study of how to be anti-racist. And so when you've got this equity thing going, we will look forward to hearing from you about the things that we can do as people, as white people.
I love that, and I really appreciate it. Part of us bringing John on board is that this needs to be thoughtful and it needs to be constructive, and we need to make sure we're not wasting people's time, that we're doing this with the authenticity it requires. So Luke and I are doing our best, but I'm really hoping with John's leadership, he can also help us be stronger, and that will then in turn give us more opportunities for this type of moment. I do know that someone, I think it was Gary, mentioned Desi Nicodemus, who will be coming onto council. He is still working with he's running Black Lives Matter Milwaukee. They do have a website that you can follow. I'd encourage a Facebook page that you can follow. I'd encourage you to do that. That is a space where you can stand with our community members of color. So that's definitely an immediate. But I don't have any brilliant thoughts today. So I can't help you on that front.
I can, along those lines, I know a couple of people of color personally, but I'm not, that's come to mind. One is Willie Poinsett in Lake Oswego, who's been doing some things around a small privileged community. You may have heard of her work. And there's a woman named Malita Amarisha out of Portland State, who has a presentation on why are there so few Black people in Portland, which of course
It's a
can include
wonderful
this.
presentation.
Yeah, so that sort of stuff. Be glad to follow. If you're interested, we can talk further about connecting with those people.
I went to that the other day, Will, and one of the things, I haven't actually opened the documents, but she created a long list of organizations led by people of color that we can give our aid to. So that's something in our anti-racist group.
End of year giving would be a great way to do that too. And I think sorry, it was brilliant. I had this brilliant thought and it's gone now. I don't know.
We've had enough brilliance today, but a lot of brilliance. Thank you again very much. I think we can call this a done operation and offer not a prayer, but a sense of warmth and connection from this operation between us and the people that serve the city of Milwaukee. And I hope we continue our relationship in the spirit of welcoming and the caring and the love of God.